They were just two stray cats fighting to survive. Then this elderly woman saw them. The biting wind whipped through the narrow alleyway, carrying with it the scent of snow and the distant rumble of city traffic. Luna huddled deeper into the flimsy cardboard box that had become her refuge, her once pristine white fur now matted and streaked with grime. Just a few weeks ago, she had been a pampered house cat, basking in the warmth of a fireplace, her days filled with soft laps and endless bowls of salmon-flavored kibble. Now, the memory of that life felt like a distant, impossible dream. The details of her abandonment were hazy, a blur of confusion and terror. A car ride, a strange park, a hurried goodbye, and then nothing. Her human, the woman with the gentle hands and the soothing voice, was gone. Luna had waited, shivering and bewildered, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows. She had called out, a plaintive meow that echoed unanswered in the vast emptiness. The streets were a harsh and unforgiving place. The smells were overwhelming, exhaust fumes, rotting garbage, the sharp tang of other cats marking their territory. Every sound, every movement, sent a jolt of fear through her small body. She had tried to approach people, rubbing against their legs with a desperate purr, but they had either ignored her or shooed her away with a disgusted frown. Hunger gnawed at her belly, a constant, dull ache that overshadowed even her fear. She had scavenged for scraps, pathetically grateful for a discarded crust of bread or a half-eaten hot dog, but it was never enough. The other stray cats, lean and wary, were fiercely protective of their hunting grounds, hissing and spitting whenever she ventured too close. One particularly frigid evening, as the first snowflakes began to fall, Luna found herself in a deserted back alley behind a row of restaurants. The dumpsters were overflowing with discarded food, a tempting but terrifying prospect. She knew she had to eat, but the thought of facing the other strays, the ones who seemed to own this alley, made her tremble. As she hesitated, a low growl startled her. She flattened herself against the cold brick wall, her heart pounding in her chest. From the shadows emerged a large ginger cat, his fur thick and matted, his eyes narrowed and watchful. He was the picture of a hardened street survivor, scars crisscrossing his face and a chunk missing from one ear. Luna braced herself for an attack, but it didn't come. The ginger cat, Rusty, simply stared at her for a long moment, his amber eyes assessing her. He had seen her kind before, pampered house pets dumped on the streets, utterly unprepared for the harsh realities of survival. He usually kept his distance from such creatures. They were more trouble than they were worth. But there was something about this white cat, something in her wide, frightened eyes, that tugged at him. He saw her shivering, her thin frame barely visible beneath her matted fur. He knew the feeling of that bone-deep cold, the gnawing hunger, the constant fear. He let out a soft rumble, a sound that was more of a question than a threat. Luna, surprised by his lack of aggression, tentatively returned the sound with a quiet meow. It was the first time she had spoken to another cat since her abandonment, and the sound of her own voice brought a fresh wave of loneliness. Rusty took a step closer, then another. He stopped a few feet away, sniffing the air cautiously. He could smell her fear, but he could also smell the desperation, the hunger. He made a decision. He had found a half-eaten burger in one of the dumpsters earlier, a rare treat. He had already eaten his fill, and a small part of him, a part he had long suppressed, felt a flicker of empathy for this lost and frightened creature. He turned and padded back towards the dumpsters, glancing over his shoulder to see if she would follow. Luna hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming at her to run, but the rumbling of her stomach and the surprisingly gentle look in the ginger cat's eyes convinced her to take a chance. She followed him, keeping a wary distance, her body low to the ground. Rusty led her to a relatively sheltered corner, away from the wind and the falling snow. He nudged the discarded burger towards her with his nose, then sat back and watched her. Luna approached the food cautiously, sniffing it tentatively. It was the most delicious thing she had smelled in weeks. She began to eat, slowly at first, Then, with increasing urgency, her hunger overriding her fear, Rusty watched her eat, a strange feeling stirring within him. It wasn't pity exactly. He knew that pity was a useless emotion on the streets. It was something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of connection, a shared understanding of the struggle for survival. He too had known hunger, cold, and loneliness. He too had once been lost and afraid. As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the alley in a layer of white, the two cats, the abandoned pet and the hardened stray, found themselves huddled together for warmth, sharing a meager meal and a moment of unexpected companionship in the chill of loneliness. This was the beginning of their unlikely bond. The first few days were tentative, a dance of cautious approaches and hesitant retreats. Luna was still wary of Rusty, her instincts warning her to be cautious of this large, scarred tomcat. Rusty, in turn, maintained a certain distance, his years of solitary survival making him slow to trust. But the shared need for food and warmth gradually eroded their reservations. Rusty, with his experience and street smarts, was surprisingly adept at finding scraps. He'd lead Luna to the back doors of restaurants, showing her which dumpsters were the least contested, which times of day were best for scavenging. Luna, in turn, proved to have a surprisingly keen sense of smell, often locating discarded food that Rusty had overlooked. One evening, Rusty managed to snag a whole, nearly untouched fish head from a seafood restaurant's trash. It was a feast, a bounty beyond their wildest dreams. He could have easily devoured it himself, but he didn't. He brought it back to their shared corner, nudging it towards Luna with a soft rumble. Luna was astonished. She had expected him to keep the prize for himself. She looked at him, her blue eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of something that might have been gratitude. She began to eat, but this time, she left a significant portion for Rusty. It was a conscious decision, a gesture of reciprocation, a sign that their relationship was shifting from one of necessity to something more. As the days turned into weeks, they developed a routine. They hunted together, ate together, and slept together, huddled close for warmth against the biting winter winds. They learned each other's habits, each other's quirks. Luna discovered that Rusty, despite his gruff exterior, had a surprisingly playful side. He'd chase after scraps of paper blown by the wind, batting them with his paws like a kitten. Rusty, in turn, learned that Luna had a particular fondness for rubbing her head against his, a gesture of affection that he found strangely comforting. The alleyway, once a terrifying and lonely place, began to feel a little less hostile. They had each other, and that made all the difference. They weren't just surviving. They were finding a small measure of comfort, a fragile sense of belonging, in their shared existence. However, life on the streets was never easy. One cold, rainy night, they found themselves cornered by a group of larger, more aggressive strays. These cats were the self-proclaimed rulers of the alley, and they didn't take kindly to newcomers encroaching on their territory. Rusty, despite being outnumbered, stood his ground, hissing and spitting, his fur on end. Luna, terrified, huddled behind him, her body trembling. The confrontation quickly escalated into a full-blown fight, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. Rusty fought with the ferocity of a seasoned street fighter, but he was outnumbered. He took several nasty blows, his already scarred body bearing new wounds. Luna, seeing him in danger, did something she never thought she was capable of. She launched herself at one of the attacking cats, scratching and biting with a surprising ferocity. Her unexpected attack momentarily startled the other cats, giving Rusty a chance to regroup. Together, they managed to drive off the attackers, but not without sustaining injuries. Rusty had a deep gash on his shoulder, and Luna had a torn ear. They limped back to their sheltered corner, exhausted and hurting. They licked each other's wounds, a silent act of comfort and care. That night, they huddled closer than ever, the shared experience of danger solidifying their bond. They had faced a threat together and they had survived. The harsh winter continued, bringing with it freezing temperatures and scarce food. But amidst the hardship, their relationship blossomed. They were no longer just two stray cats sharing scraps. They were companions, friends, a makeshift family forged in the crucible of survival. They found warmth not just in shared body heat, but in the shared comfort of each other's presence, a silent understanding that transcended their different backgrounds and their difficult circumstances. They had found a shared scrap, a shared warmth, and in doing so, they had found something far more precious, a shared connection in a world that had seemed utterly devoid of kindness. The passing weeks saw the bond between Rusty and Luna deepen from a partnership of necessity to one of genuine affection. They were inseparable, their days a tapestry woven with shared routines, silent communication, and acts of quiet devotion. They had their established hunting grounds, their favorite napping spots, and their secret corners where they could escape the harsh realities of street life. They groomed each other meticulously, removing the grime and tangles from their fur, a ritual that was as much about comfort as it was about hygiene. Luna, in particular, seemed to take great pleasure in grooming Rusty's thick, matted fur, purring softly as she worked her way through the knots and tangles. Rusty, in turn, would patiently endure her ministrations, a low rumble of contentment emanating from his chest. One sunny afternoon, while basking in a rare patch of warmth, Luna noticed a small, brightly colored bird trapped in a narrow gap between two buildings. The bird was chirping frantically, its wings fluttering uselessly. Luna, her hunting instincts kicking in, immediately crouched low, her eyes fixed on the trapped creature. Rusty, observing her, knew what she was thinking. He also knew that the gap was too narrow for Luna to reach the bird, and that any attempt to do so could put her in danger. He let out a soft, warning meow, trying to dissuade her. But Luna, driven by her instincts and a desire to please Rusty, ignored his warning. She squeezed herself into the gap, her body scraping against the rough brick walls. She stretched and strained, reaching for the bird, but it was just out of reach. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the alley. A piece of loose brick, dislodged by Luna's movements, had fallen, pinning her leg. She cried out in pain and fear, her struggles only making the situation worse. Rusty, his heart pounding with fear, immediately sprang into action. He tried to pull the brick away with his paws, but it was too heavy. He then tried to dig underneath it, frantically clawing at the hard-packed earth. He worked tirelessly, ignoring the pain in his own paws, his only focus on freeing Luna. After what seemed like an eternity, he managed to create enough space to pull Luna free. She limped out of the gap, her leg badly bruised and swollen. Rusty licked her wounds anxiously, his amber eyes filled with concern. Luna, shaken and in pain, nuzzled against him, seeking comfort. She had learned a valuable lesson that day, that her impulsiveness could have dire consequences, and that Rusty's caution was born out of experience and a genuine concern for her well-being. The incident served to further strengthen their bond. Rusty became even more protective of Luna, always watching out for her, guiding her away from danger. Luna, in turn, became more trusting of Rusty's judgment, her reliance on him deepening with each passing day. Another challenge they faced was a near miss with animal control. One morning, while scavenging near a busy street, they were spotted by an animal control officer. The officer, seeing two stray cats, immediately gave chase. Rusty, with his years of experience evading capture, reacted instantly. He let out a sharp warning meow, urging Luna to follow him. They darted through traffic, narrowly avoiding being hit by cars, their hearts pounding in their chests. They found refuge in a dense thicket of bushes, hiding there for hours until the coast was clear. The experience was terrifying, a stark reminder of the constant threat they faced. But it also reinforced their reliance on each other, their ability to work together to survive. These challenges, these shared moments of danger and hardship, were not just tests of their survival. They were the crucible in which their affection for each other was forged. They were no longer just two stray cats sharing resources. They were a team, a partnership, a family bound by a deep and abiding love. They had learned to rely on each other, to trust each other implicitly, to find comfort and strength in each other's presence. The bonds of necessity had blossomed into bonds of affection, a love born out of shared hardship and a mutual understanding that transcended their differences. They had found, in the most unlikely of circumstances, a connection that was deeper and more meaningful than anything either of them had ever known. As winter began to loosen its grip and the first tentative signs of spring appeared, a new challenge arose, one that threatened to tear Rusty and Luna apart. Rusty, during one of his solitary scavenging expeditions, encountered a discarded piece of meat that had been laced with poison. Rat poison was a common and cruel method used by some to control the stray population. He didn't realize the danger until it was too late. The poison worked quickly, causing him intense pain and disorientation. He stumbled back towards their shared alley, his body weakening with every step. He collapsed just a few feet from their sheltered corner, unable to call out to Luna. Luna, who had been napping, awoke to find Rusty missing. She searched for him frantically, her anxiety growing with each passing hour. The alley, usually a place of relative safety, now felt menacing and empty without him. She called out his name, her plaintive meows echoing unanswered. Finally, as dusk began to settle, she found him. He was lying on his side, his breathing shallow and labored, his body trembling. Luna immediately knew something was terribly wrong. She nuzzled him, licked his face, desperately trying to rouse him. A kind elderly woman, Mrs. Eleanor Davis, who lived in an apartment overlooking the alley, had witnessed Rusty's collapse. She had often seen the two cats together, and she had grown fond of them, leaving out scraps of food and water whenever she could. She recognized the signs of poisoning, having seen it happen to other strays before. She rushed down to the alley, her heart heavy with sorrow. She gently scooped Rusty up in her arms, ignoring his weak attempts to resist. Luna, terrified, followed close behind, hissing and spitting at Mrs. Davis, trying to protect her friend. Mrs. Davis, understanding Luna's distress, spoke to her in soothing tones. "It's okay, little one. I'm trying to help him. I'm taking him to a vet." Luna, sensing the woman's genuine concern, hesitated. She didn't want to leave Rusty, but she also knew that he needed help. She followed Mrs. Davis to her car, her eyes fixed on Rusty's limp body. Mrs. Davis rushed Rusty to the nearest emergency veterinary clinic. The veterinarian, after a quick examination, confirmed that Rusty had indeed been poisoned. He administered an antidote and started supportive care, but he warned Mrs. Davis that Rusty's chances were slim. Luna was kept in a separate carrier in the waiting room. She was frantic with worry, pacing back and forth, her meows echoing through the clinic. She could hear Rusty's labored breathing from the examination room, and the sound filled her with dread. While Mrs. Davis called a friend who volunteered at an animal protect association, told him the situation. Hours passed, agonizingly slow. Mrs. Davis stayed by Luna's side, offering comfort and reassurance. She explained to Luna, as if the cat could understand, that they were doing everything they could to save Rusty. Finally, the veterinarian emerged from the examination room. His face was grave, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "He's still critical," he said, "but he's responding to the treatment. He's a fighter." Mrs. Davis and Luna breathed a collective sigh of relief, albeit a tentative one. Rusty wasn't out of the woods yet, but he had a chance. Unfortunately, there was also a cruel young man, named Tom, living nearby. He was a troublemaker, and he took pleasure that harming small animal. He recognized Luna and tried to catch her. Luna managed to avoid and escaped, but she was very terrified. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and uncertainty. Mrs. Davis visited Rusty at the clinic every day, bringing Luna with her. Luna would sit outside Rusty's cage, watching him intently, her presence a silent vigil of love and support. Rusty, weak and disoriented, seemed to recognize Luna's presence. He would weakly wag his tail whenever he saw her, a sign that his spirit was not broken. One afternoon, as Luna was sitting by Rusty's cage, she saw a familiar figure approaching. It was Tom, the cruel young man. He had a sinister grin on his face, and he was carrying a net. Luna's heart leaped into her throat. She knew that Tom intended to harm her, and she was terrified. She let out a loud hiss, trying to warn Rusty, but he was too weak to respond. Just as Tom was about to throw the net, Mrs. Davis appeared. She had seen Tom approaching, and she had immediately sensed his malicious intent. "Get away from her!" she shouted, her voice filled with righteous anger. Tom, startled by Mrs. Davis's sudden appearance, hesitated. He hadn't expected any resistance. Mrs. Davis, despite her age, stood her ground, her eyes blazing. "If you touch that cat," she said, her voice trembling with fury, "I will call the police." Tom, realizing that he was outmatched, backed down. He muttered a few curses under his breath and then slunk away. Mrs. Davis turned her attention back to Luna, offering her words of comfort and reassurance. The incident had been a close call, a reminder of the dangers that still lurked. But it also reinforced the strength of the bond between Luna and Rusty and the kindness of strangers like Mrs. Davis. They had faced separation, pain, and the threat of cruelty, but their love for each other and the support they received had given them the strength to persevere. The hope of reunion, once a fragile flicker, was now burning brighter than ever. After what felt like an eternity, Rusty finally turned a corner. His breathing became stronger, his appetite returned, and he started to regain his strength. The veterinarian, cautiously optimistic, gave Mrs. Davis the green light to take him home. Luna, who had been staying with Mrs. Davis during Rusty's hospitalization, was overjoyed to see him. She greeted him with enthusiastic purrs and head rubs, her relief palpable. Rusty, still weak but clearly happy to be reunited with Luna, responded with a weak purr and a lick to her head. Mrs. Davis had grown deeply attached to both cats during their ordeal. She couldn't bear the thought of them returning to the streets, especially after Rusty's near-death experience. She made a decision. She would adopt them both. Her apartment was small, but it was warm and safe, and it was filled with love. She prepared a cozy corner for them, with soft beds, plenty of toys, and a constant supply of food and water. Luna and Rusty, initially hesitant, quickly adjusted to their new surroundings. Luna, who had once been a pampered house cat, seemed to remember the comforts of indoor life. She rediscovered the joy of soft blankets, the pleasure of chasing toy mice, and the contentment of being petted and cuddled. Rusty, the hardened stray, took a little longer to adapt. He was still wary of humans, still instinctively cautious. But Luna's presence reassured him, and Mrs. Davis's gentle patience gradually won him over. He slowly began to trust her, to accept her affection, to purr when she stroked his fur. The friend of Mrs. Davis, who worked at the Animal Protect Association, helped her to finish the adoption paperwork. The two cats, once so different, were now inseparable. They slept together, played together, and groomed each other with meticulous care. They had been through so much together, and their bond had only deepened through their shared experiences. They still retained some of their street smarts. Rusty would often sit by the window, watching the world outside with a wary eye. Luna would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, startled by a sudden noise, her instincts telling her to be on guard. But those moments were fleeting. They were safe now, loved and cared for. They no longer had to worry about finding food, shelter, or escaping danger. They had a home, a real home, and they had each other. One evening, as Mrs. Davis was sitting in her armchair, reading a book, Luna curled up on her lap, purring contentedly. Rusty, who had finally overcome his fear of being held, was nestled beside her, his head resting on her arm. Mrs. Davis looked down at the two cats, her heart filled with a warmth that spread through her entire being. She had saved them, yes, but they had also saved her. They had brought joy, companionship, and a renewed sense of purpose into her life. She stroked their fur, feeling the soft vibrations of their purrs. She thought back to their time on the streets, the hardships they had endured, the unlikely bond they had formed. They had been through so much, and they had emerged stronger, their love for each other unwavering. The ending was bittersweet. The memories of their past struggles would always be with them, a reminder of the harsh realities of life on the streets. But those memories were now overshadowed by the joy of their present, the comfort of their new home, and the enduring strength of their bond. They had found a home at last, together. And in that home, they had found not just shelter and sustenance, but also love, acceptance, and a happiness that transcended their difficult past. It was a happiness they had earned, a happiness they deserved, a happiness that would last a lifetime. The chill of loneliness, the shared scrap, the shared warmth, the pain of separation, all of it had led them to this, a place of peace, a place of belonging, a place they could finally call home. The two cats, once lost and alone, were now found, together, forever.